So I'd like to welcome you to Pietro's Ranieri Agency podcast number 8. In this series of podcasts, I'm trying to get an inside track into how the coronavirus is affecting businesses globally. In the previous podcast, we've been looking at how the pandemic is affecting the business side of consumer electronics, but today I want to explore the mental health side and the wider impact on agency staff generally. At the moment, business is very unstable. People are on furlough. Some have lost their jobs. There is massive uncertainty out there at the moment. All of this is definitely having an effect on the mental health of individuals, some whom probably never had to deal with this type of emotional management before. So I'm pleased to welcome 4 guests on the podcast today who will hopefully help us navigate this subject a bit. So firstly, we've got Ranj George, who's managing partner of Ranieri Agency in the UK. Rob Mosley, founder and creative partner at Nonsense, who are a creative digital agency based in London, working with some leading charities, including Cancer Research, Race for Life and Diabetes UK. We also have the editor of PR Week, John Harrington, joining us, and Simon Gunning, CEO of Calm, which is a charity which campaigns against living miserably. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Okay.
So Simon, jumping straight in, if you could maybe tell us a bit about Calm and all the good work you do, just to give the listeners some context in regards to why we've invited you here today.
Yeah, sure. Calm stands for the Campaign Against Living Miserably. Our tagline is that we are leading a movement against suicide. So our perspective on how society is doing this is a chosen perspective, is that we focus on the suicide rate. That the thinking behind that being that suicide is probably the indicator of the worst the possible place you can get to in your life. In 2018-19, the suicide rate in the UK grew by 11%, making it the cause of death for 125 people every week in the UK. And it remains, as it has been for a long time, 75% male. We focus on helping people never get to that place. So we do that with a combination of things, with campaigning around awareness of the issue, but also around behaviour change. So a campaign that we did a couple of years ago called Project 84 won the PR Week Grand Prix, thank you very much, and won a whole load of other things too, and was about raising awareness of the issue of male suicide in the UK. But then we'll do much softer campaigning. For example, we did a thing called Care Sewn In with Topshop and Topman last year, where we made a range of clothing for young people, which was about self-care rather than the clothing care, was about looking after yourself and looking after your friends. The most tangible output, I guess, of Calm is our helpline, which is open from 5 to midnight, 7 days a week, which deals, again, in maintenance for people who are nowhere near suicide, and we want to keep it that way. People who are worried about other people as well, but then also we deal with people who are right at that terrible point of crisis. The demand on our helpline since lockdown started has been unbelievably high. We rose an initial 37% week on week. We're now more than 40% up on where we expected to be at this point in the year. Last week, we directly prevented 16 suicides, people who were calling us with the intention to die on or after the call. And so things are extremely busy for us. But we continue to grow. We're 40 people in our head office and 57 people on our helpline. Obviously, we've had to have a look at how we're going to be doing over the next year, and that we've had a lot of hasty recalibration of our targets for the year. Not hasty, that'd be wrong, wouldn't it? Quick and efficient and well thought through rather than hasty. Looks at our budget and our targets, and we're set well. But a part of that, like you say, Pietro, is looking after our staff as well. So our staff are under a huge amount of pressure. We've had to furlough a number of people, which I'd rather not do, but obviously that's essential right now. And it's really important that we look after our staff, from comms to operations to services and everything else.
Yeah, and has have the government managed to help out with some of the funding issues you've been having and stuff? Or
there's 750 million which has gone into a central pot to be divided amongst all the charities in the UK, bearing in mind that charity revenue is going to be down multiple billions. Also, half of that has been administered by one route, half through another. So we're not optimistic about government funding, but we don't take any government money. What has been a really great benefit for us is that we're funded 75% by individuals who just love us, because we are this movement about people enjoying life, and about the sort of values that we feel contribute to that, things like kindness and tolerance and community and those kind of values, which means people, when they find us, really want to become a part of us. And the badge means an awful lot to an awful lot of people. The downside of that is when people can no longer gather, can no longer put gigs on, put football tournaments on, run marathons, all that sort of stuff, means that our revenue isn't there. But I'm not moaning about it. We continue to push hard. We've come up with a load of new initiatives in the last month. I've been amazed by our comms people and the sort of events that we're putting on off our own back. So there's no government funding for us, but there never has been.
Yeah, well, hopefully we're trying to put together something after this call next week that might lead to some funds coming in. So
yeah. Yeah, and also when we do that, though, it's important to add, we never just go after money. We're always service first. So our perspective and our priority is, number one, always make people's lives better. And what we found is when people get the bug, then they want to be a part of it.
Yeah. And obviously one of the other interesting things about having you on the call today, obviously we're looking at this from the agency point of view today. But you yourself are from agency background. You were at BBH, was it?
Yeah, I was at BBH. Yeah, I was more client side really. I was at the BBC and I was at Yahoo and at EMI Music on the technological side of marketing. So yes, client side, and then for my sins, agency side for 5 or so years before I came to do this.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks, Simon. So John, I know you've been looking into how mental health has been affecting agency staff at the moment with some of the features you've been doing. But do you have any insights that have come out of your research from kind of agencies that you could share with us, that kind of things that people are experiencing at the moment?
Well, I think a lot of it's quite obvious, really. You know, people are under a lot of stress and are finding, in many cases, the switch to home working difficult. I think it varies a lot from agency to agency in sector and by individual, but there are a lot of difficulties. And I think on the flip side, a lot of agencies have been helping with that process quite well. We hear a lot about employers kind of getting in touch with their staff just to ask how they are, and to have sort of kind of sending them the right sort of, make sure they've got the right equipment and that they're generally feeling okay. And then, you know, wellness apps and even stuff like meditation and yoga and things like that. I mean, it's obviously harder to help staff from a distance, but I think there are definitely steps being taken. I think part of the advantage in a way of the timing is, I think a lot of agencies in recent years have been kind of almost inadvertently preparing for this situation. Not that they knew it was coming, but home working has been, flexible working of some description has been on the cards for a while. So a lot of this is sort of putting in place those methods. But I think a lot of the approach to home working didn't really focus on mental health particularly. It was more on the practical side, but it does all link. I mean, we just had our Best Places to Work awards, and I wrote a comment piece alongside that said, fundamentally, mental health shouldn't be seen in isolation. You can have a lot of initiatives to help mental health in the workplace, but and they're good at dealing with the symptoms. But if you want to look at the cause of mental ill health in PR, things like working hours, holiday allocation, client agency relationships, all sort of feed into it. So that's kind of our take on it, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing I've noticed, there was, when we first went in, working at home, there was a real sort of flurry of people kind of, staying in touch, doing exercise, kind of, working out this sort of whole working from home thing. But I do think it sort of seems to have, I think as it's dragged on, I think it's the enthusiasm for the working from home and doing the fitness and, all this other stuff is kind of starting to drop a bit. And I think now is the time where actually we need to sort of look more at the mental health side of things and make sure people are okay. And I remember when I first started Ranieri, one of the reasons why Ranieri exists is because I worked at home and I couldn't stand it. Because I got to the point where, there was no separation between home life and work life, because your laptop was always pinging in the bedroom and you never had that separation. And I think a lot of people may be sort of experiencing that at the moment, especially in, the kind of agency world where you've got international clients that kind of come on come online at the beginning, at the end of days, your day just kind of blurs. You never really have a sort of routine, the start and the finish. It just kind of keeps going. So, yeah, thanks. So, Ranj, have you seen anything within Ranieri that's been concerning around mental health, or just things?
Yeah. I'd kind of concur with some of the points John and yourself were making. I mean, we're in an industry that definitely isn't 9 to 5. It never has been. And the fact that we're working from home and not having that delineation between our sort of work life and our social life just means those boundaries are blurred more. So, as you said, I think people are finding they're working throughout the day, but that is blurred into evening time or night time as well, in terms of picking up work and trying to get people to switch off, I think, or at least take, a 2-hour break. So they're not doing anything in an evening period. They just switch off their phones and switch off completely so they can concentrate on themselves, is an initiative that we're trying to run and we're trying to encourage with staff members, because I think that's kind of really key. And I guess the other thing, and again, this has always been around, is, mental health and vulnerability has many different faces, and it's difficult to recognize those faces at the best of times, even more so now, because again, you don't have that physical interaction. So checking in on staff is great, but I think just taking a more one-to-one approach with staff, even if you're not talking about how they're doing, just having a chat about things that are non-work related. So they don't always have to be a focus on mental health specifically. It can be a focus on something that detracts from the bubble that they're in, and to move them away from that so they get a break from that, at least, I think is really important as well. Because sometimes people don't want to talk about or don't feel comfortable talking about the depressive or the mental health aspect with work colleagues, but they do want an outlet to socialize or focus their mind on other things, and being able to provide that for them, again, when the boundaries are kind of being blurred between social and work, I think is really important.
Yeah, they could also, obviously at the moment, people are worried about their jobs and whether they might be going on furlough if they lose a client and stuff like that. And actually they might not want to speak up because they might not want to be seen as someone that is causing a problem, because they might be the next to go on furlough or something like that.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's very easy to treat people, everyone's concerned about their jobs, and it's very easy to treat people as social pariahs if they've been put on furlough or if they're worried about their job. And as you say, to speak up, it's very easy for them to feel ostracized that way, and to not want to speak up. And I think, again, the best we can do is to create an environment where people feel that they can at least have a conversation with someone within the team, and that we're transparent with them. So I don't think it does any good to be, reassuring with vacuous comments that everything's going to work out no matter what. I think what they want is real transparency and tangibility, where we reassure them about the good things that are happening in the business and the infrastructure, and how we're going to try and push through in reality and get through to the other side. But they also want some transparency about things we need to work on to try and, how they can help make things work for the business going forward as well to get through these times. So I think that dialogue is really important. It's not a monologue. It's got to be a dialogue between the staff as well.
Yeah, cool. And so, Rob, you're obviously in a creative agency. I guess a lot of what you guys do day to day is all about kind of throwing ideas around and being creative. Are you able to kind of sustain that at home?
we were lucky enough to had quite agile working practices and be quite heavily reliant on video calls like these anyway. But there is something missing, the ability to stick stuff up on the walls, or even just to walk past somebody else's work and just chuck an idea out there. And I think that, when you feel like you're not delivering to your usual standards, that really affects your mental health, because a lot of people's self-worth and their value comes from how good they feel they are at their job, and how good they feel they're doing that on a day-to-day basis. And so we really have to, I think, some of the time give people a bit more space and time to collaborate properly, because it is a bit harder to do that. The other thing I'm noticing is every meeting's formal now. right? Because you have to have a video call. So by nature, someone sort of tells us what the agenda of that chat is going to be at the start, where I'm used to an environment where, part of the creative process is almost having a bitch about the latest client feedback, right? Just vent, stand over a coffee in a corner, say some stuff about what a nightmare it is and how difficult it's going to be. And it's very non-judgmental, and everybody does it. You just get it out of your system, then you work, then you can be creative again. And you can't, with the best will in the world, putting in a Zoom call for have a quick bitch just isn't a thing. And I think we need to work on how, I've been talking about this with Nick and Will, how we can get our team to feel like it's okay, to the previous point, to feel like it's okay to raise some concerns at a time when there's more financial pressure on the business, there's more of a need to get stuff done, but actually it's still okay to do your little office moan that you would have done had we all been still in Shoreditch sitting around over a cup of coffee. And so yeah, I think I don't think it's any more difficult for creative thought. It's more difficult for collaboration potentially, but we're getting there on it. I just think that it's the sort of social aspects of an agency that people use as a bit of an outlet are missing currently a bit, and that's what we're trying to replace.
Yeah, no, I get that. Ranj and I have worked out a nice system where we have a Zoom call, but we just bitch in chat. So, but what worries me is that he's now got everything I've said in writing. So it's kind of. So yeah, question aimed at Simon. So we know that people are feeling really anxious at the moment, and they're worried about their jobs and loved ones and everything that goes with it. I mean, is there any sort of quick advice or strategies you could give them? Is it normal to feel anxious at a time like this?
Gotcha. I think it's really important to note that that's your brain reacting to the situation quite well. If you're not feeling anxious, you're just not concentrating. Is my favourite line of one of our new ambassadors, Susie Ruffler, who's a comedian, that the release of those chemicals and hormones into your brain are there because you're in either a defence or an attack mode, right? So it's absolutely right to feel anxious. We've got a 5-point and been peddling to people, which seems to work and seems to go down well. The first point one is switch off. It's all right to get away from it. You don't have to, like I do every morning, as soon as you wake up, look at the BBC News and read Twitter. You don't have to do that. You can switch off and you can leave it a bit. The other side is that you can stay connected. And so, like you're saying, we're using Zoom and we're using Hangouts for all sorts of things, including hanging out with friends in the evening, which is a strange experience. The third one being that you need to unburden yourself. You can't bottle this stuff up. You have to be able to talk about it. You have to be able to get these feelings out, because this is unquestionably the most bizarre experience of my life, and I think probably the most bizarre of everybody's lives. And as a culture, as a group of people, we are not particularly adept at sharing how we're feeling. And if there's anything that's going to give you an excuse to try talking about stuff, then we would highly recommend that this is the time that you do that. And for people who don't have anyone to talk to, Calm is there. So that's the fourth part of our advice, is that our helpline is there if you don't have anybody around. And the last one is keeping a routine as well. I structure the start of my day around desperately trying to avoid doing Joe Wicks. So I'll hide anywhere that people can't find me. I'll feign any form of injury in order not to jump up and down like a rabbit or a kangaroo. But that routine of getting dressed and doing things properly is very important. But I wouldn't for a second, for anybody, feel bad about feeling bad. It's totally natural. This is horrible, and we don't know what it's going to be like when we come out. But fortunately, there are lots of people, lots of organisations like Calm who can help.
Yeah, and as time goes on, in your experience of people dealing with sort of stressful situations, do their emotions start to change? I mean, do they adapt to feeling that way? I mean, have we got like sort of potentially ticking time bombs on our hands if people are just getting worse and worse?
Well, it's a definite fear that there are precedents. So the 2003 SARS outbreak, which was not anything like this at all, led to an alarming rise in the suicide rate for people over 60. And there are multiple reasons for that. The 2008 financial crash led to a terrifying rise in the suicide rate amongst men over 45 for obvious reasons, because of the expectation on particular role models on which have lessened since 2008, I think, and the male reluctance to communicate about that as was. Now that environment has changed, and I don't think that men as a group are going to be at as much risk as they were in 2008. But just those two precedents, and then everything that we know instinctively says that the fallout from these strange times, the fallout from actually, post-traumatic stress. This is traumatic for lots and lots of people, but perhaps not so much for us. Looking around these little windows, it looks like we've all got gardens we can go into and places we can find solace. But I certainly wouldn't fancy being in a 5th floor flat with 2 kids and no access to a garden. And then there's the long-term economic issues which are worrying. So I think you mentioned it a second ago, Pietro, that I think we're looking at waves, right? I think we're looking at right now, I feel exactly the same sort of slump in the initial terror and then the energized nature of getting stuff done. I'm feeling a slump too, and I think we'll see continuing waves in the changes in the way that people react to it.
Yeah, some good thoughts there. I mean, I know it's interesting when you're kind of a bit older, like we are. I mean, you sort of get used to having to deal with certain situations and things like. I mean, I run a business, so I'm used to kind of having to plan ahead, plan worst case scenarios, all of that kind of stuff, because that's just what you do is when you're running a business. But I do worry for kind of maybe younger agency members who like account execs or account managers who kind of, their life's very structured. They've gone to school, they go to university, they get a job, they get paid, they know where they are, but then suddenly the rug has been pulled from underneath them. And they're suddenly having to start really worrying about, well, have I got a job next week? And even if I lose a job, will I be able to get another job? It's kind of very stressful, and it takes years to be able to kind of deal with that sort of, just the way to sort of plan through this kind of stuff and just manage it. So John, have you heard of any interesting strategies that agencies or employers or staff have implemented to help combat mental health at the moment? Any agencies that sort of stand out? So I know you've had this sort of top agencies to work at kind of roundup that you do, and I know a lot of that was sort of focused on mental health. So have you sort of picked anything up there?
Yeah, I mean, some of it, I guess, goes back to what I was saying earlier on. It's helping make sure sort of checking in on people is quite an important one. And I think there are some agencies that do interesting things, like they'll create a group for, say, parents to make sure that, their sort of specific kind of stress points are sort of catered to, and also people who live alone, and for people who are living in a flat share, for example, where they might be with 3 or 4 other people and they're all sort of working from, the one table at the kitchen or their own bedrooms, and the Wi-Fi is not working properly and all that sort of stuff. So I think the best ones are those that have kind of really thought about the different office environments, if you like, that that PRs are working in at the moment. And alongside that, there have been things like, I've heard of quite a lot of agencies paying for subscription sort of meditation and wellbeing apps, and having sort of scheduled exercise and meditation sessions at certain points of the day, things like that. So yeah, I think they're some of the best ones. So I don't think there's anything like massively revolutionary in them. But I think it's one of the most important things is just, I think, making sure that people know that you care. I think it's quite easy probably to take people, staff for granted. And, if their internet's working and if they're filing what they need to file and all the rest of it, then assuming that they're all right. So I think it's the sort of the personal connections element that's been arguably the most important for me.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions I've got coming up actually is one that I was going to ask Simon. It's just kind of, are there any particular signs that, as an employee, we should look for in employees that kind of might be struggling? Because like we were saying before, they might not speak out. They might not actually say anything about some of the issues they've got. But like saying, there's people could be, sort of working in a 1-bedroom or shared house where they're in 1 bedroom and they're kind of there for 3 months at a little desk, and actually they're in a really bad place, but they're not kind of admitting it and just trying to really sort of, break through what is that barrier. Because if you started calling them all the time and making sure they're all right, it could almost, be the other way where it could be a bit weird. They might actually feel, well, why is he calling me all the time?
Yeah. Our head of people and culture, HR as it would have been called, has been working really, really hard. So looking at and understanding the individual circumstances. So we have only actually 2 furloughed people who live on their own in a flat. And that means that we have a certain sort of cadence of communication with them. But then there are other people who are going to be affected by, for example, the economic jeopardy more than others. So there are 2 people who have 2 kids who are furloughed, and you can see there are the pressures of time, but then there's the pressures of the future, of worrying about the future and that kind of stuff. But as you say, Pietro, it's you go case by case. You can see different needs from different people. Everybody is having a tough time. What we would normally do is talk about things like changes in behaviour and changes in lifestyle. But because we're so far removed from everybody, of course, it's very hard to spot that kind of trend. So we have every 2 weeks we have an all hands still, including furloughed people, so that communication is kept up. I did a call last week with every furloughed person, half an hour with the head of people and culture too, to really check in with them. But let's not also neglect the people who are working their asses off, trying to get those people back off furlough. It's almost actually, I don't know how you're all feeling running your businesses, but I'm feeling that my time now my time over the last month has been disproportionately, compared to how it was in the past, dedicated to HR and to finance. I mean, that's kind of that's what I'm doing. Thankfully, I've got an absolutely brilliant marketing director who can get on with the shiny, exciting stuff, which I miss. But it's a full-time job keeping up with people and making sure they're okay.
Yeah.
One thing I just to touch on that I found is going back to the fact that mental health or vulnerability has so many different faces and there's so many different circumstances to it. And I guess within our agency, we're quite fortunate that we're quite a tight team of about 15 people. So we know the people who have got sharing with other people. We know the people who are kind of living alone. We know the people who are cohabiting, maybe with just one parent or, just on their, with their sister or whatever. So we can look out for some of those signs to a certain extent and recognize what's going on and try and pick up on it. But you're right as well that a lot of time disproportionately is being spent on HR and making sure that not only the people who are working are able to do the work to the best of their ability, but also making sure that people, if anyone is on furlough, that they're also don't feel completely isolated and as social pariahs either. So it's a kind of balancing act. But I think knowing your staff helps in the process of looking out for those signs when things would be flagged up.
Yeah, cool. So just moving on. I know we're just conscious of time, but so next question is sort of a general question really, but is social media a comforting distraction in times like this, or should we avoid too much of it? So Simon, you wrote an article for Campaign entitled "Social Media is This Generation's Smoking," and obviously it was kind of slightly different subject matter, but it kind of emphasised the fact that at the moment probably a lot of people are spiking in their social media use at the moment, and is it kind of forming really bad habits for when we come out of this? Because like you were saying, I mean, people are waking up in the morning, they're straight on their social media, they're straight on their phone looking at stuff, they're on it all day long, they're now kind of communicating by social channels. Is it creating like a sort of dangerous addiction that we need to be really sort of mindful of moving forward?
No, I didn't write that, Pietro. I was interviewed and misquoted because I'm not sure it is like this generation's smoking. It was Warren at W. When that came out, Warren, I said, I didn't say that, Warren. And Warren said, yeah, but don't worry. He said, because the world will forget 99% of what you say, but people keep talking about that. So just accept the misquote and go with it. So I was okay with it. My point with that was that I think that much like smoking, even when I knew absolutely that it was going to kill me, I carried on doing it. I stopped 15 years ago, but I carried on smoking, knowing what it was doing to me, and until I worked out the truth and stopped it. And I think actually the point with social media is we'll come to a point where we work out that the bad stuff is bad, and we'll use it for much better stuff rather than self-punishment. I think the flip side of it, and we partner frequently with Instagram. We do a thing called GramFam with them at 3:00 every day. We have a comedy. We have a comedy festival with partnering with Twitter. So we're using social to make people laugh. There's the flip side of the downside is that it is unquestionably the greatest communication tool that the species has ever had. I don't know about you. I find looking into these little windows all day profoundly exhausting. I get to the end of the working day and I am knackered, let alone flipping from window to window and seeing that, Boris Johnson's had a kid and, whatever else it might be, or that kids, yesterday was kids are demonstrating a variant on the infection that's proving fatal, which blew my mind. I think turning it off and getting away from it is a very important thing to do.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, it's my next question here was just about, what's everyone's advice about consuming news? Because, should we actually be limiting ourselves to how much news we kind of take in every day? Because like you're saying, there's lots of different variants of the news as well. Like there's a strain that could potentially be harming kids, but when it was brought up in, the daily briefing, it's a very minuscule thing, and it's actually probably something that was there already. It's got nothing to do with this. But again, you can kind of, Gabriel and I, my son, we were watching whether Kim Jong-un was actually dead or not late at night on all the different forms of news that were out there. So we were looking at Korean news, South Korean news, Australian news, and pretty much every story was different. But it's kind of the same, over here when people are reporting, the numbers, like the effects, there's kind of social consequences, the financial consequences. You can sit there and just sort of read, and eventually, it's tough on the mind, and kind of especially your social, your mental well-being, just to think that we are in this terrible, terrible thing financially. Anyone could get it, anyone could die from it. It's just kind of, I just feel you need to limit yourself. And I guess, would that be the sort of advice of other people like, like Harm and stuff? How do you sort of manage this?
From my point of view, the news is a weird one, because I think people want differing opinions from different outlets to make themselves more informed, and so they can make a sort of judgment on how things, or how they perceive things are happening. I'm more concerned about the social media platforms as news outlets, because there's a lot of misinformation out there on social platforms versus something like the BBC or ITV or Bloomberg or whatever it is. So I'm more concerned about social platforms, and also that social platforms sometimes present an unrealistic, as it always has, viewpoint that people can't live up to. So, whilst it might be great, loads of people are doing the Joe Wicks workout, that might not be practical or realistic or even appealing to someone who's, doesn't want to get up at 8 a.m. and do star jumps naked around the house. So, or not naked. But, it's just one of those weird, I think, reducing what you see on social media platforms, or at least curtailing that a little bit, I think, and filtering out the sort of facades that kind of comes with it, that could sometimes lead into more mental health issues, might not be a bad idea. How you do that kind of depends on the person, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, Ranj, with the social media thing, you can tell people to use social media less, but you're competing with billions of dollars of investment that has been designed to make those platforms the stickiest things that humans have ever created. They eat our time, and they're very good at it. And actually, I think it's more about educating people on how to heart they take those things, and affecting people's viewpoint of what is realistic. Because you're right, if you go on Instagram in week 1 of lockdown, it looks like the entire world is using their newfound time at home to nourish their minds and bodies, and living their best lives, because that's what Instagram always tells you everybody is doing with their lives. And that wasn't true, obviously, but if you are vulnerable, susceptible, it's very easy to believe that that's what you should be doing too, and therefore you're not good enough if you can't live up to that. And there's also a huge education piece to be done around quality of news, and because those platforms are unfortunately still full of fake news, despite some improving efforts of the networks. All of our campaigns have a very, predominant centre on social media, and we're keenly aware that our work sits alongside, our official message from an insurance company that we work with about how their policies are changing due to COVID-19 comes alongside next to some rumours that someone's made up about how insurance companies are shafting people. And we just need to educate, because I don't think the option of use it less is particularly viable. We can say it, but I don't think you can make people do it.
Yeah, no, one of the next questions I had here was just about generally getting some advice from you guys on what we think we should do to kind of keep our mental health in check. I mean, routine was one of the things that's down here, exercising regularly, it's just maybe understanding what the balance is. So that whole kind of routine thing around, when you get up in the morning, don't check your phone immediately, wait till you get to your desk. But, you're also kind of, at the moment, I think people are much more likely to go onto social because they haven't got anyone to talk to potentially. So the first thing they're going to do is go on social. So the routine thing is kind of, what would your advice, Simon, be on sort of routine at the moment and what people should be focusing on?
I think structure what you can. Like you say, everybody was learning to do pottery and other things. I wasn't. I was working my arse off trying to keep a business going, as we're all of you, I'm sure. But do what you can. I think we're so over demanding on expecting people to comply with the ways that we think you should be living your life during this extraordinary period. I think set the bar where you can meet it. There's a guy, an ambassador, a calm ambassador, and is technically Ron on Twitter, who is absolutely hilarious and keeps posting things like, let's see, I'll go back to social again, but keeps posting things like, if you're being told that you should learn a new language and lose 2 stone, you're not going to achieve it. If you can get through the day without being sick on yourself and hiding in a corner for 6 hours, you're doing pretty well. So I think it's fine to lower standards. It's fine to not expect too much of yourself while we're doing this. I think what is fascinating and a little bit frightening is what are we going to be like when we come into partial freedom. We're not going to be able to behave the way we did before. So, but I'm concerned about expectations of everybody kind of running through wheat fields or us all charging into a pub and having pints together. I don't see how that's going to happen. So that concerns me, that we don't set bars too high only to let them down.
Yeah, no, I completely. I mean, I think a lot of what we're experiencing now is probably going to be the new norm for quite a long time. So we may well get a bit of freedom, but that freedom isn't going to be like it used to be. It's going to be, we might be able to go to more shops, or because we're still not going to be able to probably go to bars, restaurants, gyms, anything that people would, especially bars, that's all kind of going to go away. So the new norm now is probably going to be something that we're going to have to ease out of ourselves over a long period of time. So in terms of helping others, I mean, I sort of touched on this earlier, but, obviously we've all got sort of friends, colleagues that we might be concerned about. I mean, Simon, again, with signs that we should look for, and if people are showing signs that they might be sort of distressed somehow, I mean, how should it be approached? I mean, again, if it's like, we've got male friends that might not want to talk about stuff like that. I mean, how do we recognize something that could be up so we could help someone, and how should we approach it?
We've always been really, I was really very impressed with the statistic that 82% of men in the UK say they want to be the person that helps their mate. So whatever I won't name publications, but whatever people might tell us about how we hate each other, actually at the heart of our society, and at the heart of our male society too, we actually do want to look after each other. I find it quite exhausting after a day of doing Zooms and Google Hangouts to go and have a can of beer with a mate on a Zoom, but I make the effort to try to do that. And I think the important thing is to check in and is to ask, because we're not spending time next to each other. We have to be more proactive. We did a thing called the Best Man Project last year, which I really like, which is about exactly that subject of the question of why can you only really be nice to your mate once in your lifetime when you're his best man. Let's try to do that more often. So yeah, I think it's about checking in rather than about passively waiting to be told.
Yeah, and if you're worried about someone and they're saying everything's okay, but you know something's wrong with them because you know that person, is there a way of, I don't know, can you call someone to sort of see if you can get them some help and sort of force the issue?
Yeah, I mean, really call the Calm helpline. It's the only time I've ever used the Calm helpline was when a friend of mine was worried about his son, and I didn't know what to advise because I'm just a marketing idiot. So I rang our helpline and asked them for advice, and it was really, really solid and really good. They're paid and trained professional people who come from a variety of backgrounds. So if you are worried about something you don't know what to do, the calmzone.net has masses of content about how you can help other people, and the helpline is there free and confidential 7 days a week to speak to.
Yeah, cool, awesome. So look, we've covered a lot of ground here today with some great tips and strategies coming out, but to end this podcast, can you all give me one tip on something you might implement today to help yourself or someone who you think might be suffering from a mental health related issue? So Ranj, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think it would actually from following on from what Simon's been saying, I think just refer to a couple of organisations that people can call if they feel like anything's coming up. So there's a third party they feel they can confide in without feeling embarrassed or, self-effacing or anything like that in front of colleagues or friends or regardless of people they know. So I think forwarding on resources or website links or telephone numbers of a couple of organisations that have a good reputation, I think would be a good thing for employees.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Ranj. John, what about you?
I think people need to have the courage to be honest with the elements of their life that are causing pressure. So if it's work, and if you find that work is building up or causing a particular pressure, I think people need to sort of recognise that most employers now are going to be more understanding about the current situation, or should be at least. Because I mean, I find that at the moment, if you are still working, in a sense, I mean, the sort of working patterns have changed a lot, but I think a lot of people are probably feeling under more stress than ever to deliver in completely alien circumstances. So I think it's really important to be honest about that and to find out where the problems are and be honest with the individuals who can maybe help you, whether that's your employer or whether it's something family related or wherever that might be. But I think it's best to do that before it gets too difficult.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think just to flip that around from the employer's side, I think the employer should be honest with their employees as well. So if there is a danger that they might lose their job based on some circumstances, I think everyone should just be honest about that's the situation. So, because a lot of kind of worry does come from being known, certainly from my own point of view. And if if people are honest and they understand the situation, then everyone's kind of in it together at the moment. It's not something the employer's trying to do or the employee's trying to do. It's just we're all in this situation, and being honest about it both ways, means that everybody knows where they stand really. So, So Rob, what about you?
Well, I think listening to the advice, one thing I'll do as an agency owner is try and create a space for people to be open and share what they're finding difficult. I feel like I'm being a shit dad that's not as effective creatively, and I'm knackered all the time at the moment. I haven't told my team that, and I have a forum every morning where we have a morning stand-up. And I think if I can help create a culture where sharing that kind of vulnerability is totally okay, that could be something that makes a real difference for members of my team, even if it just makes them feel like it's okay for them to talk to another colleague about it when they wouldn't have done anyway. And I think it's an interesting one because it's an aspect of leadership that I hadn't thought of before being involved in this podcast. So thanks everybody for that.
Well, look, yeah, I want to thank everybody for their time today. I think there's quite a lot of interesting things that have come out of here today, and certainly a lot for us to think about moving forward. So, yeah, thanks, guys, and yeah, stay safe.
Thanks,
Thanks.
guys.
Congratulations, all.
See you later.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers, Pietro. Cheers, everyone.
Bye.